हो गया ना?
Okay, is Dr. Agarwal going to start?
Yes, ma'am, I will start. I'm just waiting another 2-3 minutes.
Okay, all right.
I'll start.
I'll wait. Thank you.
मैम अभी मैं आपकी स्लाइड्स अनशेयर कर रहा हूँ, आप दोबारा शेयर कर लेना इसको. You can share it again.
I thought I did.
Yes, that's fine. So, are you ready, ma'am, now?
Yes, I am. I hope I can move these
Thank you very much.
slides.
For the timing, let it be just off. So, welcome back, friends, for this important lecture series, the 75 lecture series started by ICAR. And that lecture series, we had 59 lectures till date. And today we are going to have the 60th lecture. As you all know, that this particular lecture series is being organized for a very important cause, and that is the 75 years of India's independence, the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. It's a matter of proud for every Indian that we had the glorified 75 years. ICAR has taken up many activities to celebrate this important day, which we are going to complete on 15th August 2022. One of the activity is this 75 lecture series. And under this lecture series, ma'am, it's a pleasure for me to inform you that we had lectures of very eminent personalities. And it's not only for the agricultural research policies, but also it included motivational lectures. It included health related issues. It covered many other journal issues also. Last few days back, we had a lecture on the child rights also. We are going to have a lecture on the women's rights also. So we are having diversified topics. And in the same series, the topic which has been chosen for today's lecture is also very relevant. And that is poverty, hunger, structural transformation, and sustainability. The India and the rest of the Asia. Very important topic, because the speaker is one of the authority at the world level on this particular topic. You know, Dr. Uma Lele, she is a well-known figure and doesn't require any introduction to this august audience. But I can just refresh your memories by saying that Professor Uma Lele was the first woman to be awarded a PhD in applied economics by the Cornell University at the age of 24. She has decades of experience in research, operations, policy analysis, and evaluation. A significant part of her experience was acquired in developing regions from a base at the World Bank, as well as in the US universities and other international organizations. Currently, she is affiliated with the Institute of Economic Growth, University of Delhi, India. In 2018, she was elected President-elect of the International Association of Agricultural Economics, the first woman to be elected to this position in IAA's 92-year history. It's a matter of pride for all of us. She organized the first all-virtual 31st International Conference of Agricultural Economists, which was held during August 17 and August 31, 2021. She became president of this IAA at the end of the conference on August 31st, 2021. Congratulations, madam, for this extraordinary accomplishment. Her co-authored book, Food for All, International Organizations and the Transformation of Agriculture, was published by Oxford University Press in October 2021. She served on the Science Advisory Committee of the UN Food Systems Summit held on October 2021. She has published extensively on agriculture and rural development, including independent evaluation reports from the World Bank. She has contributed well over 130 book chapters, papers, articles, and other writings on food and agriculture, the environment, public health, science and technology, aid and finance, and evaluation in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. A wonderful accomplishment, I can say. Her honors include many. I'll just read only few. She is the fellow of the India's National Academy of Agricultural Sciences, one of the most prestigious, American Agricultural and Applied Economics Association, a distinguished alumnus of Cornell University, Lifetime Achievement Award of the Indian Society of Agricultural Economics, honorary life member of the International Association of Agricultural Economists, B.P. Pal Award of India's National Academy of Agricultural Sciences, M.S. Swaminathan Award of the Trust of the Advancement of Agricultural Sciences, the Clifton Wharton Award, honorary fellow by the African Association of Agricultural Economists, and an honorary doctor of agricultural science at the Stellenbosch University of in the South Africa. She has established 3 mentorship programs at the Agricultural and Applied Economics Association for students from developing countries, and an award for best research on gender at the International Association of Agricultural Economists. At the IAEA, she is actively promoting opportunities for women in agricultural economics profession. What a wonderful accomplishment. Thank you very much, madam, for kindly accepting our invitation to deliver this important talk. And we are sure that our audience will be greatly benefited with your rich experience and with your wide experience, I can say. And the topic is very relevant in today's context. So thank you very much, Professor Umalele, and the floor is yours now. Thank you. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you can hear me.
Yes, very clear.
Okay, good. Okay, so I have a lot of slides and I'm going to go very rapidly through the slides so that if there is an opportunity, we can have a question and answer session. Now, why am I not able to change the slides?
You can just press right arrow key, ma'am.
I know, but it's not moving. The screen is not moving. That's a problem.
If you go to the bottom, you will see a light, two light arrows. Click on.
I know, but the screen is locked. I'm not able to move it.
You again
Sorry.
share and then again share. Maybe it is visible.
Okay.
Now it's coming. Yeah.
I think hopefully it moves. Okay, so the scope of my presentation is quite wide. I'm going to speak briefly about what has gone well in India and what remains to be done. Some new evidence on poverty reduction, which in a way asks more questions about how much poverty has been reduced in India than used to be the case before. India's performance selectively compared to other Asian countries. I think it's quite important that India not just look at itself, but look at how well it has done compared to other East Asian and Southeast Asian countries. And then some complex challenges about poverty and sustainability issues. What does India need to do in order to get to a better place than it is currently? So that's the scope of my presentation now. I'm hoping that these slides will move forward. I don't know why they are not. That's a real challenge.
Just click anywhere on the slide and then use your arrow keys.
Yeah, it's okay there. So there is a long list of what has gone well in India. One good news is that the IMF is predicting that India will resume its rapid growth rate, which was affected severely by COVID. There is also significant poverty reduction, but as I'll point out, it's not as significant as it has been in East and Southeast Asia. There is a new debate on poverty. And in a way, on a positive side, India has now developed large number of areas where there are food surpluses. It's the biggest producer of milk, fruits and vegetables, eggs, meat, etc. It has huge grain stocks, and it's an issue that I will discuss much further because I think India now needs to ask itself some questions about whether its grain stock policy makes sense going forward. It has huge assets in being able to reach people, universal ID card, bank accounts, a huge food distribution program, a national market is emerging, and it has number of other positive things, including, much to my pleasant surprise, India has become the largest unicorn producer with private investments which can be taken advantage of for betterment of the Indian society. So one of the questions then is, how is India's democracy affecting policy reforms both positively and negatively? That question needs to be asked in the context of all the pressures on natural resources. I don't need to go into these in detail, but we know climate change, water, soils, air, everything is being affected severely. And now India needs to have a very right mix of policies and investments driven by the issues that are outstanding in the rural sector. So that would be the focus of my discussion going forward, which also means more innovative technology, genetic technologies, digitalization, etc., etc. Why compare India with other Asian countries? We often, as a large country, look at ourselves and don't ask difficult questions about how well we are doing compared to other Asian countries. So East Asia and Southeast Asia are the most dynamic regions of the world. They have experienced rapid growth. They've experienced decline in poverty and hunger more rapidly than India. They have more active manufacturing sectors than India does. And in general, they are much more integrated in the world economy than is India. So before the new evidence arose about undernutrition and poverty, these are the kinds of figures that even I was publishing before, which shows that India still has large incidence of hunger compared to, say, China, Indonesia, etc., all the South and Southeast Asian countries that I have shown here. But that its poverty has declined much more rapidly than its incidence of hunger. And these are all evidence-based numbers from the World Bank and FAO, etc. And it always puzzled me, why is it that poverty is shown to be declining, but hunger is not declining in India? Well, now we have maybe some solutions or some answers, but also many more questions. So there are new papers that have come out, one from the World Bank and one from the IMF. The paper from the World Bank basically says that there has been no new data since 2011-12 when NSS surveys stopped, and it makes these projections and comes to the conclusion that its earlier projections, which are shown in these dotted lines, were much more optimistic than the bank's projections currently. It projects that 10% of the population in India is living in poverty. Whereas the IMF one, which is interesting, done by a former colleague of mine who used to work for me a long time ago, it also projects based on 2011 numbers, but it comes to the conclusion that India has actually eliminated poverty completely. And it does that by taking into account the food distribution that is done in India to show its impact on real incomes as a result of that distribution, and then comes to the conclusion, as you can see from these figures, that India has almost by 2019 reached a zero hunger situation. I think recent papers, including by Ashok Gulati and others, have really raised questions about whether we should be happy with this outcome, knowing what we know about stocks and price policies in India, something that I'll come to in a few minutes. Now, we know that if we compare India's performance on COVID compared to not just China, but many other East Asian countries, India suffered a lot more from COVID. And in part, it was because it had not invested enough in health and education of people. So COVID affected it much more strongly, despite the fact that India is the largest manufacturer of vaccines in the world and was distributing vaccines to other countries that were facing a problem. So, and COVID particularly affected poorest people who had to go back to rural areas and come back, etc. And just reading stories about their plight was heartbreaking, to say the least about it. And then there are all these other challenges that I mentioned earlier, soil degradation. I just heard an interesting presentation on Soils Initiative of India. India is an outlier on groundwater exploitation. Climate change is affecting yields, etc. So there still continue to be huge challenges going forward. So to look at the challenges, it helps to look at something called structural transformation, which economists have described as several different elements to it. One is decline in the share of agriculture in GDP and share of employment in agriculture, productivity growth, demographic transition, overall income growth. And one of the problems that economists are now writing about is premature deindustrialization, and India also suffers from that problem, as I will point out. So if we now look at just growth in per capita income, and it's interesting if we start from 1960, when many of the Asian countries were kind of at a similar stage of development, you can see that South Korea has been an high flyer even compared to China. In fact, in the second figure that I have on the side, we could not include South Korea because the scale was so high for South Korea that other countries could not be included. And then you can see China has done better. Thailand, Indonesia have done better than India. Now, if we look at TFP growth, total factor productivity in agriculture, something that Keith Fugly has been tracking for a large number of countries, again starting from 1960, we find that although India had the Green Revolution and that led to other revolutions, that White Revolution, Poultry Revolution, etc., etc., you can see that the green lines, and in almost all my graphs, India is the green line. TFP growth has not done as well in India as, say, South Korea, which is the pink line here, and red is China. And other countries in South and Southeast Asia have done better on TFP growth than has India. Then if we look at the sources of this growth in productivity, we find that Africa, much of this increase in production has come from area expansion. In East Asia and Southeast Asia, much of that growth in productivity has come from intensification, which means producing more with the same inputs compared to, say, even India, which has had some increase in intensification, but not as much as in Southeast Asia. And I think if we ask ourselves questions, why is it that India hasn't done as well in productivity growth as was the promise after the Green Revolution? It's partly because, quite frankly, the central government has not invested as much in R&D as is the case in other countries. And you can see that in sometimes around 2011-12, the growth rate declined. And although the states continue to invest, the central government just hasn't supported R&D in a way that it should. So since this is an ICAR lecture, I'm hoping that this message that that India needs to invest more in R&D will register and something will happen. So these are figures just for China and India, and you can see the Chinese growth in R&D has been amazing, much more rapid than is the case in India. Something like 5% compared to 16% annually in China. And you can see the outcome of that in terms of results. India once upon a time was a great publisher of journal articles, and you can see Brazil and China started overtaking India sometimes around 2005, and they are now much above India in part because we haven't invested enough in R&D. And that then shows up in the total number of agricultural researchers, although they are large in China and even in India. If we look at them in terms of number of farming community, we find that India's intensity on research is much lower than is the case in those other countries. And there is also difference in the human capital. And I think our friend Tamboli, who was my colleague at the bank and knows agricultural education, has reminded me that India needs to strengthen its state agricultural universities substantially if we compare it with IITs and IIMs. So then this investment in R&D shows up in the steady increase in per capita income over time by decades. And the interesting thing about Asia compared to Africa, for instance, or Latin America, is that all countries have improved their situation decade by decade. But look at where South Korea is, and then followed by China. And although India has also similarly done well in every decade compared to the previous decade, it's not done as well as other Asian countries. Now, what are some of the reasons for it? First of all, India has had a much slower demographic transition than other countries. South Korea's demographic transition was so rapid that the population growth declined rapidly, but more women entered the labor force. So the green line again shows the demographic transition in India. The pink line well below that is South Korea, followed by China, and then other countries doing less well. As a result, India's population is going to peak sometime after 2027, if I recall correctly. And therefore, population pressure is much greater in India. Now we look at share of agriculture in GDP. Again, shares have declined in all countries as was expected, but this decline has been slower in India than in other countries. If we look at, I use 1985 as the base because then it enabled me to include Vietnam, which would not have been possible otherwise. So what has happened to employment? The share of GDP in agriculture has declined, but the share of employment in agriculture hasn't declined as rapidly as is the case. For instance, again, the pink line for South Korea, red line for China. Some of these lines are for Southeast Asia. And then India's decline in employment in the agricultural sector has been much slower, which means majority of the population in India that is poor is in rural areas. If we look at value added, because economists have normally talked about structural transformation as moving from agriculture to industry, again, India's rate of manufacturing has not been as rapid in terms of share of GDP as is the case in other countries, say in China, South Korea, etc. And therefore it suggests that India has not been able to create enough value added and employment, this next figure, compared to say South Korea, China, etc. The green line again is India employment is increasing, but nowhere compared to other countries. Employment in the services sector. This surprised me because by and large, we think of India as a country with strong service sector and it's creating employment, but India's service sector is very dualistic. It has this IT sector, which is very dynamic, but compared to say South Korea, the pink line again, which has created huge amount of employment in the service sector, and so had China, India's employment in the service sector is nowhere comparable to that in other countries. So what do we need to do? We need to invest a lot in the quality of human capital. And these are numbers Tamboli provided, that India has IITs, which are world class. India has management institutes, but large number of state agricultural universities, which were once upon a time really at the cutting edge of where research was, and it looks like they are no more there. So when that is combined with savings and investments, again, you find that East Asia is an outlier. It's saving more than 40% of its GDP in savings, and it's also investing a lot of that in capital formation. The blue line here is is East Asia and Southeast Asia. India's savings and investment rates have gone up over time. The green line shows increasing, but nowhere near the case in other countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia. And of course, as would be expected, there is substantial difference in the performance of individual states in India. And just in 2 years, you can see that some states haven't grown at all, and it's something that we should be paying more attention to. So what is the result of it? India's capital formation on the left-hand side and foreign direct investments in India have been much lower. Again, the green line shows India's foreign direct investments compared to China, the dotted red line, or East Asia, the dotted blue line. So no wonder that the growth rates in India are lower, because savings and investment rates are lower and capital formation is lower in India. So it's obvious that India's rainbow revolution has improved diets, it's diversified diets and production, but we still need a lot more investment, lot more reforms in policies, institutions, and infrastructure if we are going to keep up with the Southeast Asian countries. Horticultural crops in India is a very positive story, that the amount of horticulture India is producing now is substantially larger than grain production. But again, the problems are in marketing, in storage, value added, etc. So quite a lot of losses. Again, if we look at investments in water, China turns out to be investing a lot more in water management than is India. And I have a number of papers on that, but not enough time to discuss this. On trade policies, again, compared to Southeast Asia, India's trade policies have been highly unpredictable. And by and large, India has been more autarkic compared to other South and Southeast Asian countries. The bans on onions, we are all familiar with them. But recently, India first declared that it will export wheat. Our Prime Minister mentioned that in international circles, and then India changed its mind and decided not to export wheat. Gulati and Juneja in recent papers make the case that India, in fact, had abundant wheat stocks, and it didn't have to stop exporting wheat, because as they point out, what this does is reduces India's credibility in the international markets, first declaring that it's going to export and then it's not going to export, etc. And in any case, their argument is that given the stocks in India, there was no reason why India couldn't export. I think one of the important implications of India's price policy, this next one slide that I'm showing, is that India is really an outlier in net taxing its agriculture. And this is important to note, because the general view in India is that input subsidies are causing a lot of problem, which rightly people point out. But if you look at price policy, output price policy and input price policies, in net, India's farmers have hurt price policy has hurt the farmers more and favored consumers. Whereas in almost all other countries, as you can see here, they have favored their farmers more than they have favored their consumers. And again, it's the political economy of price making in India that needs more analysis. So what do we see on the food procurement and distribution side? Currently, there is the price policy in India, agricultural policy, is playing a dual role. On the one hand, it's trying to stabilize prices, which it does quite well. But on the other hand, it's also trying to collect enough grain in order to distribute it to meet the requirements of the Food Act. And most economists point out that one instrument of policy can have only one aim, whereas India has this dual aim of policy, which confuses the policy making. And so the result has been that India's buffer stocks have been much larger, ballooning costs of carrying these buffer stocks and discouraging diversification out of rice and wheat in Punjab, as we know. And this idea of feeding 800 million people has number of problems of errors of exclusion and inclusion, which means that people who deserve to be included in food distribution are not always included, and those that should not be in the food distribution program are included. So that's a problem in terms of the efficiency with which the policy is implemented. And most of all, I think this carrying huge stocks takes resources away from investments. And I've been pointing out in my earlier comments and slides that India needs to invest a lot more in R&D. So where could those resources come from? They usually come from price policies that India has been promoting. So here are some solutions that others have in India have written about them also. I'm not going to go into them in detail because there are a lot of intricacies to reforming the current procurement and price policy. But here are some solutions of how India could make food distribution more targeted to really deserving populations. Gradually, slowly move from physical distribution of food, which it has been doing on a very large scale compared to any other South and Southeast Asian country, and move to cash transfers. And especially if it gave more cash to farmers in India, they would not be as badly affected by the policies as they have been. So no wonder farmers have been complaining about this bias against agriculture in India, which is not, in my view, as broadly discussed in India as it should be for public debate to be able to change policies. A livestock sector is another example. When India has the largest livestock sector in the world. Now, often India takes pride in the fact that its milk production is larger than any other country's production. But if we look at the productivity of this large livestock population, again, there is huge scope for improving productivity of livestock as well as for sustainable growth by reducing emissions. And here are some ways to do it. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but they are in the PowerPoint and people can look at them and see what can be done to improve the genetic merit of the livestock herd, what can be done to focus smallholder dairy production much more on producer companies, etc. So there are other areas there where there is scope for improving policies. Soil health cards, the Prime Minister today talked about a very important initiative that India has embarked on, and the government is to be congratulated on it. Again, I think one should be doing an independent evaluation, monitoring and evaluation of soil health card scheme to see how well it is going. Similarly, investment in precision irrigation is increasing. And I think people are saying that while that is very desirable and it saves water at the micro level, at the macro level, unless there is better governance of water, and again, there are many issues in improving governance of water. The new technologies can in fact increase water use through so-called Jevons effect, on which again I have written more, but not enough time to talk about it. So on the whole, then what do we need? We need to lower the transaction costs of India's agricultural production and distribution, reduce food losses. Farmers need the freedom to sell in the markets wherever they can get a good price, rather than lot of restrictions on markets, boost investment and build efficient and sustainable supply chains. Again, it is an area where India can do a lot to improve its performance. So government reforms in agricultural marketing are important. Farmers have demanded assured procurement of 23 crops. It's interesting, even 2 crops providing minimum prices has presented a problem, and obviously providing assured minimum prices for 23 crops is not very practical. So the alternative solution to that is to try to improve markets and supply chains, physical infrastructure, market information, etc., which we need to do more of. Private companies obviously have an important role to play. They have begun to play that role, and much more can be done to improve the role of the private sector. So in other words, I think my overall recommendation is reduce the scope of government interventions, make them much more strategic, which means invest a lot more in R&D, invest less in market interventions, shift price policies from subsidies to investments, reduce distortions, shift price policies also from pro-consumer policies, which India has pursued as an outlier compared to other East and Southeast Asian countries, make them much more income oriented, and particularly because there's been so much talk about doubling farmers' incomes, unless we change price policies and procurement policies, that's not going to happen. So there are these many other recommendations on improving farmers' access to finance, improving physical infrastructure, etc. So these are the references. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Malele ma'am, for your insights and for giving an overall view on this important topic, that what is the poverty, hunger, and this structural transformation which is required for the sustainable India. And you have compared very well with the rest of Asia, where we stand and how we can really change ourselves. You have given a lot of good examples. You compared the GDP, TFP, the R&D investments, the demographic transitions, and many more things. So I'll not take much time. I'll take a few questions which are there by our August audience. One of the question is by it is by I think Dr. Nagesh. So, ma'am, Nagesh says that premature deindustrialization versus objectives to reduce farm-based employment and share in GDP are they not paradoxical? And his next question is, did it not help to have higher farm-based employment instead of service sector in a country like India with second largest population during a global pandemic COVID? From this question is from Dr. Nagesh, who is working in ICAR. So I hope you can give a brief reply.
I'm not sure I understood the question about manufacturing and service sector. I mean, India has tried to increase its manufacturing sector, and there has been a lot of public policy discussions about it. But if you look at the share of employment in manufacturing in India, it's not comparable to what's happening in many South and Southeast Asian countries. And it is partly because our labor laws have inhibited creation of manufacturing sector. There are many reasons why the manufacturing sector hasn't done as well. And I was surprised to see that countries like South Korea, for instance, not only expanded their manufacturing sector very rapidly, but they have now made the next transition of moving from manufacturing to service sector by creating a lot of high paid employment in the service sector, because they have very advanced systems of digital transformation in South Korea, for instance, and in China, than has been the case in India. So my point was that we do need to think about structural transformation in terms of creating more productive employment in the manufacturing and service sectors to absorb labor which is currently in agriculture in low-level productivity activities. And India can do that only if it invests a lot in education and health. It also creates an environment where there is much more positive incentives for investment in manufacturing sector in India. And Indian experts have written a lot about the fact that there are 2 or 3 big houses in India that seem to get a lot of policy support in India, but not generally a positive environment for investment in the manufacturing sector. Quite frankly, I haven't really looked into it as much as many others have, but that's my impression. In general, the data show that India hasn't created as much employment in the manufacturing sector. And as long as it doesn't do that, then a lot of that labor is remains in rural areas in low productivity agriculture, and that situation needs to change.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Dr. Tari. And he is asking what type of transformation are needed about agricultural technology transfer from production focus to value chain mode. Could you get it?
Yes, the question is what kind of transformations are needed in value chains, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, in general, I think one of the new developments in the world, including in India, is that because highly processed junk food is much cheaper than healthy food, many poor people, particularly those who can't afford healthy food, are shifting to junk food. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that shifts are taking place, particularly by poor people. And the result of this is not only that diets are much poorer than than used to be the case when people depended more on homemade food, but also that the diseases related to the consumption of junk food have increased, including obesity, cancer, heart disease, etc., etc. So if we are going to make that healthy food more affordable for large number of poor people, then India needs to improve the supply chains for fruits and vegetables. Vegetables particularly are, there is very rapid loss in the production of vegetables when there are no cold storages, no transportation facilities. And the examples of potatoes in India shows that if you invest in cold storages, that really improves potato production. And that needs to happen with many other fruits and vegetables, more processing, production of juices, canning, etc., etc. I think if you look at, say, India and Brazil, Brazil also has many tropical fruits, many of which went from India to Brazil in the times of the Portuguese interventions in Brazil. And their fruit and vegetable sector is much more advanced in terms of producing and marketing, storage, etc., than is the case in India. So what does that require? It first requires investment in storage, in access for farmers to have access to finance, which means they can hold their produce longer than they would if they have to sell it at the lowest price. It also means investment in cold storages, in physical infrastructure, in small enterprise investments in canning, freezing, etc., etc. So there are a whole number of activities in the processing sector where this large amount of production that India now has in fruits and vegetables can be used much more productively to both create more employment, reduce the cost of healthy food for poor people, enable the shift from junk food to healthy foods, and a lot to be done in that area.
Thank you, ma'am. There is another question by Mr. Deshpande. What are the problems with India's agriculture research system? What are the current agriculture research strategies and how these could be improved? And he is further asking, low investment in agriculture R&D is one big issue, but the devil is in details.
I didn't hear the last statement. What was that?
He's further adding, low investment in agricultural R&D is one big issue, but the devil is in details.
In the details, yes. Of course. I mean, I can't give all the details in a 30-minute presentation on how India's research system should be reformed, particularly because most of the audience comes from ICAR and they know it a lot more better than I do. But I think if we look at the outcomes of research, and I present some figures which were developed in India comparatively of publications by Brazilian research system, Chinese research system, we can see that Indian research system has not been as productive as it was in the past. And there are many issues in the way R&D can be improved. It's not just increased investments, but it's also the way the research system is managed in India, with a need for much more freedom for researchers to be able to be creative rather than having to fill 50 forms in order to be able to buy a pencil. I'm overstating it, but I think people in the research system probably know what I'm talking about. So that's a subject in itself. And I think if India is going to increase its TFP growth, then the R&D system needs to be far more productive. And that means one needs to look at not just ICAR, but the state level systems, the colleges, state level universities, etc. The whole shebang of things that needs more attention than probably it has
Thank you, ma'am.
received.
May ask Dr. Suresh Pal if you have anything to add, or Dr. Birthal.
Mute.
Yes.
Unmute. Yeah. Maybe we have Professor R.B. Singh who would like to say something.
Professor
I'd
R.B.
love
Singh, I
to
will
hear
give.
from-
Yeah, but
I will request him.
three
will
things
ask.
I would like to, in fact, bring to attention of Umaji. First
Okay.
is the three major things which are not so desirable, which has globally, in fact, we are witnessing. First is this impact of COVID. Though the Indian economy has recovered,
Impact
it's
of
higher than
COVID.
the
COVID, yes.
yeah, higher than the pre-COVID level, but is still a large sector, MSMEs particularly, they have not recovered that well. That is the
Yes.
first thing which we need to address.
Yeah.
Second thing, we have another major constant now. That is because of this cost push inflation, because of this Ukraine.
Oh,
problem.
right. You're right.
The oil prices, they have risen
Yes,
like
yes,
anything,
yes.
and they are going to impact in fact, entire world. And then we
Right.
are going to have
Including
problems.
India, I agree.
Yeah, including India, cost push
Yeah.
inflation. And third thing which you have mentioned, we need to again look at it, the amount of which is required also, but amount of support is provided by the government in terms of food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, and many other subsidies. They are much
Yes.
beyond the target actually. So
Yeah.
how we are going to manage the economy, particularly this fiscal discipline we are going to follow, that is very, very important. Otherwise, there would be problem of resources. We'll have more subsidy, less investment, and that has going to impact on the Indian economy. But thank you very much, Dr. Umalele. It has been always a pleasure to listen to you. You come out, every time new ideas and new kind of evidence, and really pleasure to listen to you. It's always
Thank you, Dr. Suresh Palji. Thank you.
and we'll be working together for the audience
let us-
2024 conference.
Let us also get views from Dr. Chandrababu. He was raising hand. He is Vice Chancellor from Kerala Agriculture University. Dr.
Okay.
Suresh Babu, yeah, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ubalele, for this nice presentation. You are actually one of the recommendation at the end. You are actually suggesting opening the agriculture to competition. But traditionally, the India is the food supply or the essential is the people expect the state to be the provider for that. For this political stability, that is very key for the growth and development of any country. So that is the reason why we actually purchase huge buffer stock to feed the million in case any event, some adversity happens. Recently, also, if you see the vaccine, even the advanced developed countries are just stocking vaccines in billions of vials instead of giving to countries which are affected. So under such a uncertainty, so suddenly opening this agriculture into open competition, both the farmers and the consumers will be greatly affected. So how we do this transition in a gradual manner? And do you have any countries? You have cited many countries. Is there any good example of a country which India can emulate? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you are making. In fact, when there are all these issues of high levels of inflation, etc., that is probably not the best time to make policy reforms because, as you say, I think recent evidence of 2007, 2008 shows that, in 48 countries, developing countries, there were food riots as a result of price policy increases. But I think what people like Ashok Gulati are arguing is that in some ways, India has been overcautious in reforming its food policies. And ironically, those food policies have affected farmers adversely much more than we realize. Because the general impression is that all these subsidies are benefiting farmers, but the world evidence suggests that the rest of the world is supporting its farmers much more than India is. So if our farming community, which is some 60% of the population living in rural areas, is going to improve, then it's not enough to just talk about doubling farmers' incomes without asking questions about what kinds of policy reforms are needed in order to double farmers' incomes. And this year or next year may not be the right time to do this because of the high levels of inflation in India and everywhere else in the world. So government has to be very cautious about taking risks in changing policies. But gradually, it has to start thinking about where are areas where we can slowly improve. And it doesn't all have to be overnight. I think what happened in those 3 policy measures which were first announced and then retracted is that I think it came as a surprise to most economists because they had strongly supported these policy measures, but so it may not have been the actual policies that were changed, but the way they were changed without appearing to be consulting all the key stakeholders that mattered the policies to be then completely retracted with 180-degree turnaround. So the process of policy reforms is as important as the changes in policies themselves. And I think that is an issue that should be discussed internally in the country about the stakeholders, how to increase their ownership. And this year is probably not the best time to talk about reforms because of the high levels of inflation, etc. That's happening all over the world. India is a victim of those external circumstances, and I think unfairly being criticized outside for continuing to make arrangements with the Russia, to get oil at a cheaper price. But it needs that because of its balance of payment situation, etc. So these are not easy subjects, and I shouldn't be giving advice from 5,000 miles away about what should be done, just to highlight them.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Professor Chandra Babu. Before I invite Professor R.B. Singh, I request Dr. Pratap Brittal.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam, sir, for such a wonderful overview of the Indian agriculture and Indian agricultural food and food policy. In the beginning of your lecture, you started with the high rates of malnutrition and hunger in India, despite the fact, amidst the huge food supplies. The last year, India exported about 20 million tons of rice and 8 million tons of wheat.
Right.
And this is again the very high rates of economic growth. And I think this kind of puzzle will remain until unless we look very carefully in the measurement of the hunger and malnutrition and the data sets that we use. Probably that hunger and malnutrition that we estimate it is basically based on the FAO data and something like that. On the other hand, this data. So some kind of, looking into the data set to resolve this puzzle, it is equally important. And until unless this debate will keep on going in the coming years also. Another, of course, in the passing, you just showed one or two slides on the livestock sector of India. And this is the sector which holds the promises for future growth of Indian agriculture. Recently, I estimated that in the past 1 decade, the share of livestock sector in agricultural growth was 55%.
Wow.
It's a huge, it has been growing very fast. And
Right.
despite the fact that this
Yeah.
sector didn't get much of the policy support
Yes.
except the dairy cooperative movements under the leadership of Korean. Now,
Right.
see, if you look at the investment, it receives very little investment of that what is going to the agriculture sector as a whole, about 10%. Agricultural credit,
Yeah.
there is just about 6% or something like that. Moreover, there is a policy conflicts.
Mhm.
Policy conflicts. Why I say this is because on the one hand, we have banned export of beef or the live animals or the cattle.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, our local cows, whose main purpose of rearing was to breed
Yeah.
for draft power.
Uh-huh.
And the mechanization, subsidies on tractors, machines, etc., they have made the male cattle redundant. But still we are saying, okay, we have to give more push to the local cattle, etc., until unless we resolve this kind of policy conflicts. So it will be difficult. And my hunch is that if better we don't intervene much in this sector so that it keep on growing itself.
Right. I agree with you. I mean, I included those 3 or 4 slides on the livestock sector because I feel that it is a very important sector for the reasons you point out, the large population of cattle in India and its low productivity and relatively little attention to it compared to cropping. I think traditionally we've been obsessed with rice and wheat, and other commodities haven't received the attention that they deserve. I was pleased to see a recent paper which showed that pulse production is doing better in India now in the last 10 years than is the case before. And in the livestock sector too, I think it needs much more attention, but I also have hesitations because of this government's policy about attitude towards cows. And I don't need to go into it. The political problem that the government has created about the livestock sector, on which large number of very poor people depend on for their livelihoods on the one hand. So it needs more attention. And on the other, it's a source of methane production. So if we are going to change the emissions from the livestock sector, there are many things that India can do, including this improved ration balance approach. I have a colleague in the bank who works on the livestock sector, and I was surprised that it's a good approach. It reduces methane production by the livestock, but only 1% of the cattle population is currently being fed that improved ration balance approach. Only 1%. So you can see 99% of the livestock sector needs attention. And so I think those are the kinds of areas that need more attention away from rice and wheat. And the only way that can happen is if we also reform policies in rice and wheat. So we release resources and policy attention from rice and wheat to all these other things, fruits and vegetables and fisheries and livestock, to diversify production.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Now, finally, because we have to keep the time also in view, I request Professor R.B. Singh for his final words.
Thank you, Dr. Agrawal. Let me tell you to begin with, to listen to Professor Uma Lele is always a privilege, and I must say, Uma ji is the pride of India, and she is a synonym, what I say, to excellence in agricultural economics. So Uma ji, it is wonderful to listen to you today, and as usual, you have given us many wonderful messages. One message which is very clear, that we find that there is a lot of confusion in the data quality and the data availability and the way it is being really distributed and known. So I think there is a tremendous need for setting our house properly in the data system, with the analytics being available, big data analytics being available. It should be very useful to collect the right data and make sure that the interaction effect among the various factors with the availability of analytics and big data analysis are able to help in designing our policies or structural changes. As it is said, we must be able to measure correctly, to manage properly. So this measurement, whether it is correct, when we look at the Global Hunger Index and we also look at the Human Development Index of India, there is so much of difference in the different estimates and different publications and so on and so forth. So this disparity needs to be taken care of. As pointed out very clearly, we are suffering today in the new world that we have to probably, as we are saying, COVID has really touched everyone. The entire humanity has been touched by COVID, and therefore we have to be prepared in the total sense of the entire thing, as we call it, one health, one world, one earth. And that total concept of soil, plant, animal, human, and the planet and the carbon farming and conservation and zero energy losses and so on. So if we look at that kind of a thing, then today we have to think very differently. Our way of thinking has to change, and probably also we have to appreciate that India during the COVID period, I mean, it is paradoxical that India was able to achieve the highest production of all the major commodities, as a matter of fact. India, we were number one in the last 2-3 years, the total food grain, the horticultural products, as well as the livestock products, all of them went up, and it was agriculture which was able to really give the real help to the poorest of the poor and to the agrarian people, as a matter of fact. So I think agriculture has to be brought back again at the center stage of the prosperity. And therefore, when we talk of the one world, one health, and the development needs to look at people's planet and prosperity, then agriculture has to play a major role right in all these three things. We also noted very clearly that the total factor productivity continues to be low despite all these excellent developments. And to increase that, there is tremendous need for further strengthening our research and technology development. And that is the basis. Science, technology, and innovations will make the difference. But when we look at and Umaji is so correct, that when we look at the investment, when we look at the impact of investment in research and development, I think it is amazingly so distorted. We ought to invest much more in the research and technology development. The two parts of the research and development. One is the science of delivery, and the other is the science of discovery. While we might be doing slightly better in the science of discovery, but we are doing very poor in the science of delivery. And the extension, the investment in the total technology transfer system, the education of the extension agents and the KVK's uptake, and so on and so forth. All those things are extremely important, and we must be able to have a second look at the entire chain. And so the science social responsibility with must marry the corporate social responsibility. And when we talk of the increasing the investment in agriculture as a whole or in research as a whole, when the two marry, the private sector automatically, the corporate sector responsibility with the science social responsibility. If they get together, the corporate sector must invest more, much more than what they have been doing. And this, I think, the policy should be able to bring the right ambience, right atmosphere to allow the two to marry. The social and science responsibility should be able to marry each other. And this is being indicated, and this is being shown also, as we have seen. Horticulture and livestock sector have really done extremely well, and they will continue to do well, hopefully, with the 5 to 6% annual growth, if they are able to maintain against the overall agricultural growth of 3% plus. I think these are the driving forces, and we must be able to add value along the entire value. There is tremendous scope of value addition and prevention of waste in the value chains for horticulture and livestock. And there should be a greater attention given. Umaji pointed out the waste that we are, I mean, it's a crime, and that waste should be stopped. 25% or so at times is so high of the total production. And therefore, when we get into that, then automatically the trade policy, the supply and demand balances, the overstocking or understocking or the distorted trade policies, all will come to guide us in this process. And finally, I would like to say that whatever policy reforms, structural changes we bring, please make it that these are based on science-informed facts and evidences by science. If you go by the science fact, don't go by the data which is misleading. Make it sure that the data is correct. Make it sure that the data is reliable. If we have the right science to guide us the right pathways for the evidence-based policy formulation, then we will not go too wrong. We will not be giving the loan waiver all the time. The kind of the safety measures, the social safety measures, very often we use are much more politically driven rather than fact and science driven. It is the high time we must speak out very clearly that there is a need for science driven policy changes, and those will be much more tenable to ultimately make everyone happy. And therefore I submit that science led and science evidence policy reforms are the need of the hour today. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And Umaji, again, thanks again. It was wonderful to listen to you and to learn more from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was just going to make one comment about data. You know, the national sample surveys were India's pride for a long, long time. And since 2011-12, there hasn't been an NSS survey that has been publicly released. They have been unofficially released, but that's an example where in some ways India is regressing from its great tradition of collecting good data and being able to analyze it. And many Nobel Prize winning economists have written about this and said, what has happened to this country which had good national sample surveys? So people like you who are and others who made the point about data, they really need to insist with the government that it should not regress. I mean, we expect them to progress, not regress. And NSS is an example of regression. And I don't know why what the real reason is why those data haven't been made public. But the rumor was that maybe it wasn't showing as much increase in income as the government would have liked. I don't know whether there is any truth in it, but that's not the way data should be treated. As you correctly said, you know, data should be based on what is actually happening, and the government should not be interfering in those kinds of things.
Yes.
So I think all of you in ICAR who are in this audience, they need to make bigger noises about the importance of data and maintaining our traditions of good science and good statistics in India, for which India has always been well known. And people are raising questions about it now.
Thank you. Very good.
And even people are also questioning the methodology being adopted for this global hunger index.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
So that also has to be reviewed and seen.
I agree. I think the more work India does on its own society, it doesn't let something like IFPRI drive the conversation by using the global hunger index, which is to be questioned, I think. But if the work has to come from within India, and that is where I think there is need for a lot of younger people in India to do more analysis.
Yes.
On all these subjects that I'm talking about. So
thank you very much, Professor R.B. Singh sir, for your always nicely summarizing and giving your evergreen critical viewpoints.
yes, I agree. Thank
So
you.
thank you, Professor Singh. Thanks to all our audience,
Thank you, sir.
and especially those who put their questions. Dr. Suresh Pal, Dr. Birthal, Dr. Babu, the Vice Chancellor, and many. We allow only the top audience, and others they connect them through the live streaming. And there are many universities who connect through the halls. So they just put a big screen, and then hundreds of persons they just listen to these talks.
Yeah.
And especially the special thanks to you, ma'am, for sparing the time and coming out with so many beautiful slides, so much important data, so much analysis, comparing India with the South Asia and with other countries. Really, you have put a lot of insights into this and a lot of facts, which, as Professor R.B. Singh has rightly told, Gagar mein Sagar. सागर में गागर सागर में गागर
Gagar में सागर.
So, just for your information, I'm coming to India for the 2024 conference, as you know.
Sure.
The next international conference is going to be held in India. And I'm hoping I can come sometimes before that too, COVID willing. But because now COVID has become very unpredictable, so we never know what's going to happen. But anything I can do to help build research on these kinds of issues, I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for kind
and
offer.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak.
We will convey your message. We will convey your message to Dr. Mahapatra.
Okay.
And unfortunately, he could not join. Otherwise, he doesn't miss even a single lecture, and he always attends. But because of his lot of engagements,
I understand.
Yeah. So thank you once again, ma'am, for this beautiful words, beautiful advice, beautiful conclusion, recommendations, and many other insights which you have given today. And thanks to all our audience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good to see you, Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Umaji. It is always a privilege. Undiminished pleasure. Undiminished pleasure.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Namaskar. Namaskar, ma'am.
Wonderful. Look forward to seeing you. Look forward.
Bye, Suresh.
Namaste.
Now I can unmute. So hopefully, Umaji, we'll meet sometime by the end of this year for the conference. Thank you, Dr. Shah.
She has left.
Acha. So thanks to you for sharing the.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was
Namaskar.
good. Yeah, namaskar.